Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thanks Aurelia for asking me to share my research. Thanks, Anna, for your work. So I thought that today I'd talk a bit about my previous research and at the intersection of travel writing and translation, and how it connects to my current research, which is in its very initial stages, and where it is now. And I'm a bit of I have some text, and I hope to get through them. If not, I will share select parts of it. So, in my doctoral research, I was exploring the relationship between travel writing, and translation, with particular attention to I was particularly interested in examining the plurality of mediations readable in a specific account, to underscore translation as a process involving a range, but not exclusively interlingual ones. To this end, I translated and annotated sections of the French, from French traveler naturalist Pierre Sonner's Voyage aux Arts orientales et à la Chine. I drew attention to the international dimensions of colonial-era and Orientalist knowledge construction, the intersection of the local and the trans-regional, and particularly the travellee, a term coined by Mary-Louise Pratt to refer to people and places traveled to and traveled over. The travellee in my work has so far figured, has been explored. I have explored the figure of the translator-interpreter, the native translator-interpreter, also referred to as the go-between, who inflects representations and translations that circulate through travel. I should note that what's important to mention is that the travellee belonged to a heterogeneous group that was becoming increasingly mobile within India in the 18th and 19th centuries. In my current research, I'm exploring the travellee again, with focus on the travellee's itinerancy, which draws attention to the traveler-traveler relationship as marked by synchronicity and co-presence. What Johann Fabian describes as shared or intersubjective time. So as I mentioned, the research is in its early stages, and today I want to discuss a few narratives of Indian hospitality as part of that discussion. As they are described in English and French travel accounts. Alongside, I interweave these with descriptions of pilgrimage in Indian travel writing. I'll mention one of them. In particular, I'm interested in the descriptions of or references to the travelers' rest houses offered in their house.
Okay, all right.
Thanks. I can forget.
Okay.
While colonial-era European travel accounts of India often mention travelers' rest houses across the country. In French texts, for example, they typically appear under the rubric of religion of the Hindus specifically. The idea of studying this came from an unexpected source. In the summer of 2021, I came across the news of the partial demolition of Kaman-Sarai, a halting station for travelers in Haryana, northern India, northwest India. The report described Sarai as a structure built in 1820 that has since served many purposes, reflecting the diverse histories of the city. The idea of exploring dwelling, materially and conceptually, as entangled with travel and traveling emerged from reading the brief report. The rest house, it seemed, could be a site for exploring the traveler-travelee encounter, drawing attention to the traveler in place, movement arrested, and the traveler as a mobile figure off place, and for exploring travel as a meta-subject experience. Pilgrimage has played a formative and evolving role in travel and travel writing in India. Although my study is limited to Hindu examples, the French and the English were more interested in Hindu texts or references in Hinduism than to Islam. Pilgrimage, in fact, has been common practice across religions. Religion and the accompanying themes of doctrines, rituals, and fables have served as the mainstay of colonial-era European travel accounts of the country, and more often than not, they have worked to fix the travelee in time and place, where even descriptions of daily practice of religion happen through the pivotal view of the observer, effectively cancelling out the contemporaneity of the travelee and translating her or him into an eternal present. But there are also openings in the same accounts, that suggest ways of reading the travelee into the text. When considered alongside and in conjunction with the travelee's narrative of a pilgrimage, and the recognition of the scripting politics of the colonial context zone, these openings can unsettle the orderly presentation of travel and mobility in imperialist narratives. The examples I've discussed today are from these ones. French traveler Louis de Gonfay's reflections on Hindu hospitality in his voyage dans et Plurality. I'll be looking at the translation in particular, Voyage of the Indian Ocean and to Bengal. Translator is anonymous. I'll also be looking at English missionary Elijah Wood's personal narrative of the mission to south of India. And thirdly, I'll be looking at an account of pilgrimage by Enigula Viraswamy, Telugu interpreter, worked in Tamil and Telugu for the English colonial administration in Madras, now known as Chennai, in the early 19th century. So, part of the changing politics and economy and of the tradition of hospitality in the region, I think pilgrimage and the rest house together capture the idea of shared time and co-presence. That's kind of my focus. Rest houses as a place of shelter is also useful for taking through the process and experience of the materiality of travel. For even though travel involves, as Clark notes, a continuous process of exchange, for example, think of food, shelter, information, Few studies have explored the details of these processes. As well, if a good Hindu is expected to be hospitable to all travelers, as the narratives present them to be, the pilgrim, so the all travelers would be the pilgrims, the non-pilgrim wanderer, the local, the out-of-towner, the foreigner. These categories kind of get blurred, especially if you think of India as a multilingual space. So my purpose here is not to question the idea of India as religious, but to gesture at a reading that helps understand religion and its practitioner, in this case the travellee, as constituted by travel and mobility. To apprehend travel as marked by multiple presences and to foreground the heterogeneity of mobility itself. The exploration is based on a central assumption that the temporal relation between the traveler and the travellee is embedded in culturally organized practice. So a bit about religion in European travel accounts of India. This is something that I've looked at in my previous research as well, but just for providing some background and context. I think I've mentioned a few points. Late 18th century, in the late 18th century saw the emergence of what has been described as modern Orientalism. The secular institutional study of the Orient by specialists capable of understanding Oriental languages and handling primary source material. Spurred by a quest to denigrate the Bible and destabilize Christianity, it focused on Asia's non-Abrahamic religions, especially those with texts which are possibly older than the Old Testament. This broadening of perspective was prepared by a growing interest in India as the quote-unquote cradle of civilization. And whether implicitly or in an overt fashion, religion became central to writing about India, serving the overarching role of situating India historically, philosophically, and epistemologically among nations. As Kate Marsh argues in her exploration of French writings on the subcontinent, scholarly interest and increase in objective knowledge during the period did not necessarily change the strategies of representation used, nor did it preclude the privileging of Hindu India at the expense of other religions. Notwithstanding the discovery of textual Hinduism, explaining religious and social practices in India depended on mythologizing religion. French myth-making, for example, operated in two ways. The first corroborated the Essaidian conceptualization of colonialism, in which the silent Indian is represented by the superior Western observer. The second posited Indian society and culture as an ideal. What scholarly interest did provide was material that was adapted and re-inscribed across a range of genres in France, Britain, and Germany. More often than not, the notion of India as a homogeneous space, homogeneous Hindu space, tended to subsume all aspects of the local, and is therefore an instance of the immobile locating of the traveler. However, as I demonstrated in my research, the overarching explanatory power bestowed on religion in European representation of India could mean that while a traveler framed his or her observation by deferring to an influential European narrative without substantiating it, for for example, Bromfield talked about religion, but defer all these comments to Sonera's writing. He knows best. I take it word to be the last one. Some details within these same works can put the same narrative to question. So they contradict each other at times. So there's these are images of rest houses that are still in existence, not in use. All of them in Tamil Nadu, South India. So who is the traveler in this research? While the traveler in Pratt's analysis is posited as a participant on the receiving end, keeping in mind the systematic elision of names of local post-colonial European travel accounts, I seek to include those whose interactions with the traveler can neither be conclusively established nor considered outside the range of possibilities. Indeed, the fact that the rest houses in colonial India were used by all kinds of users, soldiers, commoners, the elite class, warrants this approach. The category of the traveler in colonial India is not clear cut either. European travelers were rarely visitors only. They were colonizers, traders, soldiers for hire, naturalists, orientalists, and in many cases what we might now understand as expatriates in the subcontinent, pointing to their long stays in the country. And it is often impossible to disentangle the 18th and 19th century French and British travel accounts of India from the socio-political and cultural shifts affected by colonialism in the region. In my research, I draw on scholarship of colonial India, focusing in particular on the native translator-interpreter, commonly referred to as Tubash Pandit Munshi. Tubash refers to someone who uses two languages, person of two tongues. Pandit would be someone who is an expert in Sanskrit literature language, and Munshi would be someone who would work in Arabic, Farsi, specifically, but in fact, the categories are not that clear. Munshi would well be speaking Sanskrit and Farsi. Since both Farsi and Sanskrit had, especially Farsi in the 18th and 19th century, with the refugee of Hong. So, where was I? So I draw on scholarship focusing in particular on the native translator interpreter, commonly referred to as Tubash Pandit and or Munshi in colonial-era records. And these studies also look at the information networks that they helped shape them. These studies do not focus on travel writing and are concerned with discourses and images of the other constituted by travel. So while they do not focus on travel writing, the knowledge they look at has been shaped by travel. As scholars of tribal history in India pointed out as well, the tribal service communities in the 18th century were key enablers of powerful and interpretive patterns of change. So that's kind of one way to think of the travel. The traveler in this research is also the native traveler, and I use this terms interchangeably in my research. It may be helpful to note that the colonial presence in India has never been as complete or coherent as colonial-era discourses, including those found in European travel accounts, or their retrospective studies have projected it to be. European travelers in India primarily, although not exclusively, because of the country's linguistic plurality, would rarely have access to information that could be construed as pan-Indian. Diverse linguistic and cultural practices, even if not always radically different from one another, except at extreme ends of the country, might even mean that the native traveler could become a kind of foreigner in their own country or outside his or her region. In a sense, the foreign here in this research becomes a differentiated graded category. The European traveler one among other foreigners. The narrative of religious India, even if it addresses a major preoccupation among its people, has had the effect of labeling this plurality. Travel in colonial India. I don't know what that means. Yes. Journeys understood as pilgrimages in India have almost always been entwined with secular activities. So this is available from its journal account of pilgrimage. For example, in a work titled Circulation, Piety and Innovation, authors Rao and Subramaniam note three types of circulatory travel in late medieval and early modern India. Sea voyages shaped by long-distance trade, regional travel, and third, travel linked to a kind of imaginary landscape, going as far back as the epics and to early medieval folk literature. Within this third category falls Tirtha Jatra, Sanskrit expression, or translated into English, pilgrimage. Prominent among written accounts of this kind of travel is this work titled Kashi Tirtha Yatra by Veeraswamy. He was interpreted to the British colonial administration in Madras. What sets this, I'll talk a bit more about it later, but what sets this narrative apart from much of colonial era travel narratives is a sense of religion in practice as bound up with the political, and an attention to details of a journey through which traveling and dwelling, the religious and the secular, emerge as co-constitutive. That Veeraswamy was an interpreter to the colonial administration is not a coincidence. While the native translator-interpreter, as a practicing Hindu or Muslim, was often a pilgrim, pilgrimages also played an important part in collecting and recording information, not simply devotional in nature. In his study of intelligence gathering and social communication in 18th and 19th century India, C.A. Bailey has noted the importance of native itinerant specialists as a source of knowledge for the ruler, and eventually for the European trader, traveler, and colonial administrator. Pilgrimage routes were an internal part of the domestic information networks. In the domain of information, 18th century India presents a paradoxical case. Even as colonial rule expanded, many sectors of the pre-colonial communication system survived, were regenerated or expanded. While the Hindu conceptualization of geography was derided by European travelers as wild, colonial cartography, I think, next one, yeah. Yes, previous one. Okay. Yes. Colonial cartography made use of established pilgrim routes, for example, as is evident in this in Reynolds' Bengal Atlas. The Indian response to these interventions was to adapt Western geography to the Sanskritic Bharat India. The concept of a land in which Hindu sacred sites defined its bounds, implying, as Bailey observes, I quote, there could be no geography and no itinerary, which was not to some extent an act of worship and an engagement with time. So a bit about intersubjectivity and the rest house. Travel as an intersubjective experience finds material presence in the descriptions of rest houses that already mentioned briefly. Commonly referred to as chowdhuries in French text. Rest houses have also been are also referred to as chowdhuries, which is an Anglo-Indian word. Chatram, which literally means umbrella in Tamil. Chawadi as well, and Dharamsala, you also have Sarai, which is related to Caravanserai. So these rest houses were located along major pilgrim routes and crossroads, but catered to travelers of all kinds. Travelers on Île-de-Perron and Son-era, for example, refer to the chowdhury as an integral part of the travel experience in India. Son-era describing them as a common feature along travel routes, similar to caravanserais in Persia. Louis de Pompey, an officer in the French army who traveled to India in the 1890s, late 80s and 1780s and 90s, described as rest house in his described rest houses in reflection on the Hindu ideal of hospitality. Four things. So this is I will read the English version, this is the French. Hospitality is a virtue which the religion particularly recommends, and on that account, a person on a journey is considered by them as a sacred object. Chowdhuries, which are places nearly similar to caravanserai, are built in which the traveler may enter freely, lodge, dress his provisions, and depart without paying anything. A traveler arrives without ceremony, takes possession of the house for the moment in a manner it belongs to them. Another comes, makes room for him, and so on. And the newcomer, without saying a word, fixes himself wherever he pleases. If a European be present, they have the complacence to leave him a little corner to himself. The narrative voice of the traveler adopted in this example is only suggestive of personal experience. It's very ambiguous. We don't know whether the traveler was there and was just, what was the source of his information. Was he observing in person or not? So it's not an acknowledgement of having been there, really. But this ambiguity is at odds with the claim to first-hand knowledge that underpins the traveler's rhetoric of authority. But this very ambiguity, I argue, unsettles any understanding of the traveler as a privileged observer, and suggests a space where the traveler is a co-traveler, witnessing while being witnessed, hinting at a reversal of the relationship in the travel account. While scholarship on travel and travel writing in India have not explored the places of dwelling in any significant way, studies of material culture, particularly architecture, which focus on the construction and patronage of pilgrim rest houses, have explored the rest house as a site of diversified social outreach in 18th and 19th century India. Inspired by religion, it is part of the practice of hospitality that has been incredibly adaptable to changing representational strategies. While not all rest houses were open to everyone, during the early colonial period, Europeans in South India, I am focusing on South India in this research, were free to make use of these facilities and found them to be a convenience while traveling. As public institutions, these were both deeply rooted in the local society and constitutive of diverse social and economic networks made possible by travel. In South India, for example, rest houses or chatrams were often close to temples, and the latter were part of the material culture shaped by the intermission of political and economic changes with cultural formations. Temple towns were often close to colonial commercial centers like Pondicherry, the main French trading post in 19th century India, or Madras, the kind of center for the English in South India. In South India, the terms chatram, chudri, the term that I just kind of cited, chawari, chaudhuri, had multiple meanings in Telugu, Tamil, and Sanskrit, referring to a resting place for travelers, a meeting point, a place in which to carry out public business, or the office of the chief of a community or a locality. As Dana Admon points out in one study, and I quote, the overdetermination of the word hints at the richness of the roles, the institution, and actors associated could fill. Unquote. This shifting relationship with tradition is evident in the Dubash, the native translator interpreter, cultural mediator. His presence was integral to the colonial-era European travel and the negotiations it entailed. Meaning a person of two languages, the Dubash, the word Dubash honors the role of a go-between or a broker. Their usefulness extending well beyond that of a translator in the conventional sense. The Pondicherry Dubash was responsible for bookkeeping, secretarial work, brokering, looking after finances, and for keeping secrets. While emphasis on religious activities was an integral part of the Dubash lifestyle, religion and charity could be motivated by devotional, social, financial, or a combination of all these. Prominent Dubashers would establish and maintain rest houses, which were a form for cultural investment, rather than driven purely by fight. So, it's like this. My second example is the account of pilgrimage that I already mentioned by A. Viraswamy. It is a day-to-day account of Viraswamy's 16-month journey from Madras in South India to Varanasi, and a return itinerary via Calcutta, with multiple stops at rest houses along the way. The account is compiled from letters that he wrote in the course of his journey to his friend Srinivas Pillai. Viraswamy was traveling when English company rule in India was firmly established. This is reflected in his itinerary and the accounts of encounters with colonial administrators along the way. In his account, God is very interesting. The kind of his account is punctuated with reflections of religion and debates with fellow travelers who were also part of the colonial administration. In his account, God is always represented as one and supreme, suggesting, according to scholars, a drive towards monotheism, which may itself be considered the result of the desire to confront the one Christian God with its Indian equivalent. But there is a skillful negotiation at work. The all-pervading one, Viraswamy notes in one entry, is one only, and there is no objection to his being called or worshipped by any name, image, or any other method. What is noticeable here is the terms of adaptation. So it's kind of a translation that makes the Christian God meaningful, blurring any fundamental difference between the one and the many, and denying any originary authority to either. During India's long 18th century, scribal specialists traveled across devotional as well as literary networks, often to fulfill spiritual commitments, but also to enhance their social and professional standing. Pilgrimage could be both a spiritual journey as is in this case, and a means to promote one's image as a company scribe. So Swami is very evident. He was writing to company administrators, officials, what exactly is achieved through his travel. For example, he was detailing the route and noting that I have been giving correct histories of all the Hindu places, making several observations on Hinduism, Islam and Christianity, also upon Hindu mythology and astronomy, and indicating the usefulness of this information for governance. It is evident that as an employee of the company, he was a privileged traveler, traversing the country with a large entourage and often making arrangements, having arrangements made ahead of his arrival. Often his outlook, not to be confused with, I think, uncritical acquiescence, can also be read as part of the maneuvers of the native interpreter's life. Unlike most colonial travel writing, his account of the quotidian experience of travel locates the traveler in the socio-cultural and political milieu of the region he travels in and through. Interestingly, the record of gradual and increasingly noticeable changes in geography, language, currency, clothes, and physical features the further he moves from home defies any stable distinction between the local and the foreign in the account, or between the traveler and the traveler. So the foreign here, as I already mentioned, emerges as a gradient. Let me conclude with a few points on travel as an intersubjective experience. In Bromfield's description that I just discussed of rest houses, the link between description and experience is obscured by the ethnographic present tense. The illusion of the personal creates a sense of eternal validity while conveying an illusion of realism. The narrator's point of view does not easily allow for alternative interpretation. Time and gaze involving the reader, inviting the reader to identify with him and his construction of time. The reader needs to draw on other sources to fill in the blanks. So the other source I looked at, another source I looked at is that by the account by Elijah Poole, who was traveling in India a few decades after Bromfield. Who was an English missionary who recorded his account in narratives of a mission to South India. And Poole's account provides a more vivid description of the rest houses and indicates that he used the facilities available in the places that he traveled to. Poole's account is punctuated with description of seemingly endless stops across South India and exchanges with locals, inhabitants of the area, or those who travel to speak with the missionary and listen to him talk. In fact, the references to chultris, the rest houses, are almost exclusively related to missionary work. While Bromfield, who idolized naturalist Pierre Tonera, sought to adopt the impersonal voice of a naturalist traveler, missionary Poole would have reason to include the travelee in his account as more than an object of observation. Including an interest on the part of the native in conversion had to involve conversation. Interestingly, European observations on Indian hospitality tended to be subsumed under religion. In Poole's case, it is not the religion of the travelee, but the zeal of converting the heathen to Christianity that gets foregrounded. So, concluding points. The separation of the traveler's time from that of the travelee effected through the treatment of hospitality under the theme of religion, and the creation of a generic other emerges as a denial of intersubjective time or covalness, a term used by Juan Fabian. As Fabian argues, while the construction of the traveler's object involves prolonged personal interaction with the other, that interaction is kept out of the written record. Although the knowledge gained from such research reinforces the discourse, which constitutes the other in terms of spatial and temporal distance. Thus, the other's empirical presence turns into his theoretical absence. If travel is composed of movement between spatial locations, the process of that movement of negotiating minor journeys and moments of dwelling that both joins and separates departures and arrivals is what I argue makes a traveler. Indeed, almost every entry in Veeraswamy's account ends with a halt, throwing into relief the travel that necessitates the halt. Bromley's description of the European travelers depends on the Dubashi suggestive of traveling and resting as a quotidian practice for the travelee and of the uncertainty and immediacy of the moment when the guest and the host need to find common ground. One way to think about intersubjective time, then, is to gesture at an understanding of common active occupation of time as the basis of travel experience, which is not up to the traveler or the travelee to deny or allow. I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very interesting.
Thanks.
So, are there any questions?
Yes, Susan.
I was actually, is my volume working all right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure the other one would work. Thank you so much for that. It's Sanjukta, I've been very interested to see how your work on this has been shaping up. And so, which I think one of the things my initial reaction about, and it's new material for me, but it strikes me your choice of texts is so crucial, right? And that finding the Veeraswamy and putting Veeraswamy's writings, especially that they weren't made available in English translation until 1973, thinking about that, the facts of translation and how you bring them back into the discussion really does lend itself very well to this argument you're making. And it also strikes me, what you're doing with this is, because of course, it matters which texts are translations, right? And the fact that Grand Prés was translated into English like almost immediately, right? So the facts of translation very much work to support, your focus on exclusions and the fact that and the fact that you need or the question of what you do with texts that are, as you said, there are theoretical absences of others created, but part of that is because of the absence of texts at the time. So I do think this focusing on the texts and what they do and do not reveal is really very productive. And certainly this combination of the three of them, I found really effective.
Thank you, Susan. I really am interested in creating a kind of a composite, rather than a reified local. And in fact, my interest in this particular topic and line of thought also stems from my own relation to Indian languages. I think we have talked about this earlier. As a Bengali speaker, I am at once, and there are overlaps with the way Veeraswamy or an Indian traveler will be approaching language and travel itself. But I am also they are just those overlaps. There is no full identification with any of the languages of India except Bengali. That too, if you look at the historicity of languages, has to be partial. And so the way to look at the top, I actually have another Anandaranga Pillai, another native translator who worked between French and Tamil and English in my research there. And so thinking of creating composites so that there's room for other explorations. You don't have one kind of traveling or local. I hope that makes sense. But you're so right to point out about the significance of the text and the way they get executed or interpreted. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I do apologize for the awkwardness of not being able to be there or getting my camera working. But I do appreciate being able to hear your discussion. I can't quite tell how many other people are there, so I didn't want to mobilize the discussion, but I wanted to leave space for other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, the research now. I just reading your articles and listening to your presentations whenever you speak at Glendon. And it's really fascinating for this relationship first between the traveler and travelee. It's already something different, right? Because both pasts are in motion in different ways, but most are. As the relationship between both that makes them.
It's very much relational.
Absolutely, yes. With them. Yeah, so this is really interesting. All the names, you mentioned about how different names for different activities related to translation and interpreting, right? A little bit like in the Middle Ages in Europe, there was no like one term for translator. It was like a list of different names, professionals related to different activities, sub-activities related to translation. So, so I have a question about the habitus. Because it's a very important concept in translation studies, and it's very helpful also to understand what we do as translators and why we do what we do. And even for teaching is really relevant because it allows us to understand actually who is that professional agent. So how would you define the habitus, the translatorial habitus in India? There's anything?
Yeah, I mean, I can give a specific example of there has been some research done on a specific figure, Anandaranga Pillai, who was a very important and influential interpreter for the French in early 18th century, early to mid 18th century. And Pillai is interesting. It's described as somebody who did not want prominence, but wanted influence without prominence, a kind of a kingmaker who is always under the radar. And I don't know if that speaks to the idea of what kind of influence or what kind of place in society he imagined for himself in the colonial kind of, although the French were not as influential as the English had become in the 19th century, they were language, that it was lost to the English. But in the pockets of power, where they were, there was influence. The role the translator would play would very much be a role of connecting cultures. And so the translator, interpreter, I mean, it's probably more appropriate to talk about them as interpreter at times. Was a kind of, I think they saw themselves as fluent in the traditional and the changing, facet of society. The connected between colonial society changed by colonial influences, that could be linguistic and cultural influences, but also a fluency that kind of going back into, they were actually valued for their expertise in Tamil or Sanskrit or Telugu, these languages, and the ability to access tradition for the colonial administration. So that kind of, I haven't done research focused on habitus yet, although the ideas related to habitus didn't necessarily figure in my research. How they saw themselves, how they saw their place in society. In the late 18th century and 19th century, there was, as I mentioned, the native translator was also a very mobile figure, which really meant that they would be getting work as translators for the colonial administration. And for example, in Calcutta, in the late 18th century, there was this big college of languages opened, Fort William College. So there was kind of a movement from traditional education to language education, to teaching in these colleges. So they will be teaching alongside somebody who's teaching German, teaching the colonial kind of administrators or Orientalists. Someone who will be teaching Latin, someone who will be teaching Sanskrit, Farsi, and so on. So those also influence how they look at themselves as kind of a connection between tradition and I would say modernist change, early modernity. Very interesting.
Yeah. I would ask a follow-up question to that, and I do think, Aurelia, this question of habitus really does allow for targeting of some of the specificities, and of course, when it goes on to the question also not just of translating but teaching, I wonder, it's very striking that all three texts are by men. And especially this religious component, I wonder how much that is, or how you see whether there were female presences, and if there weren't, which components were the ones of this that were most exclusionary.
Right. Yeah. I mean, certainly it needs a bit of digging. I feel like more research. Certainly there are visible female presences in the public sphere. So, and that's something that I'm interested in looking for. And it is interesting that European travelers, 18th century, there are very few female travelers who are mentioned in India. I mean, there have been work on that, but I haven't really looked at it to be able to talk with any degree of comfort,
Right.
But this is something I'm interested in looking at as a figure in my work, especially when I look at Bengal, which is kind of one component of my research on the travel.
Right. Yes, no, it strikes me that I was wondering about the rest houses and the provisions one would expect, cooks, and then I was thinking, well, would these have been male or female, and the cleaning? But also I was thinking then of the European situations where secretaries, well into the until the end of the 19th century, it was only with technology that secretaries and those professing actually became gendered female more usually. So I think those connections, right, are the commonalities that the travelers and travellees would have shared in terms also of more ideological structures that could be very much tapped into. And it's something, the taken for granted nature of this that they would have shared, I think offers you some opportunities to, really draw attention to those things. I think a lot, there are many, possibly more commonalities among this is what opening up the category of the travelee as a more equitable figure in this relation, I think, really allows you to see then and identify what has been overlooked in terms of these sort of on the ground power relations as well.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, the only mention of women I find is in Elijah Wool's description of the rest houses, where he refers to female occupants of the rest houses who are kind of anecdotal, where in one section he describes seeing a woman who was afraid of the European traveler and was trying to protect her child. So the people traveling with children. He also describes that all kinds of travelers occupy the space, men, women, kind of not distinct in any, or there's no separation of any kind in that sense. And so there are clues that invite questions and explorations. And thank you for pointing out. So this is something I want to definitely explore further.
Okay. And it's also a difference, if I may add, it helps identify the specificity of the Indian context vis-a-vis other colonial contexts, because I think that's one of the things your work is also really valuable for, is that so much of post-colonial, even theory does, it's homogenizing, because there's the character, once you have a character of a colonizer and the colonized, like the traveler, it's very much presumed that there are, and that's why that they are very, like everything they encountered was very similar, and being able to identify both specific, singular ways that in the context, I think that's also why the habitus becomes important, right, Aurelia? That it's very much, once you focus on this specificity of these cases, that also will allow you to identify what was, for example, very different in the case of North American colonialism and those types of encounters, or South Seas, or some of the other places where missionaries were active. So no, I really would just encourage you to, that's very, very promising lines of research.
Great point. Thank you so much.
And Sanjukta, who would be the mediator, or who is telling the stories about, writing the story, narratives about India from the point of view of travelers? Because there's there's a kind of new recent body of knowledge, of publication, studying this question. So who and why is writing a narrative to represent another country, attract students, to attract potential tourists, right?
It depends on what kind of, course, there's so much information. brochures, not you know, like YouTube, for example. I think, and if you look at travel blogs, yeah, they are kind of the big source of, I think, they may invite a kind of approach to travel. You know, people looking at food only, into for a certain kind of adventure. I looked at, interestingly, there are tangential points of you know, like contact between the kind of research I'm doing and what's being written now. For example, William Dalrymple, who's he's not a traveler, more like an expatriate who lives in India, a historian who in fact wrote a book about religion on India. The travel book focusing on religion called 9 Lives. And there, the narrative is different in the sense that it is a record of his travel through India with quote-unquote travelers, local travelers, who are on pilgrimage. So all kinds of, some of them are pilgrims, but some of them are, you know, kind of religious practitioners of kind of all facets of Hinduism. Hinduism doesn't come in one paper form, whose lives have been kind of are in a flux. So in a way, religion in flux is what this book notices. And what's interesting is that in that work, Dalrymple is in fact the conversations take place in different languages, traveling through India. So South India is Gujarati, like I think a few languages. He also names the interpreters who translated the travelers, and fellow travelers, the Indian travelers for him, the conversations. So I must say I agree on that, although I think it does repeat that you know, the pattern of talking about India in terms of religion. But it certainly is a fresh way to look at mentioning the translator thinking and naming them in the credits of the book. And it's a fascinating read of religion in modern India and the problems that it has brought about in the wake of the new kind of new administration, which kind of champions a kind of religion and a take on Hinduism. Their take on Hinduism is very specific. So this is the time that the story is located in, situated in. But it's certainly, to answer your question, that is a kind of interesting source for. There's a host of other writers out of India, but there is this kind of travel writing, well researched. There's also well-researched, I'm interested in well-researched blogs. They are important for especially for tourism. And some interesting work comes out of those blogs. They don't like it. The social experiment for us. Yeah.
But do you think that they are still rooted in this colonial observer?
Yeah, even the correctives, quote-unquote correctives are very telling. You know, there's all they react to the kind of the cascade of the. So it's a groove, it seems. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm actually generalized.
Yeah, but you've got original in that part, but it's still there.
Yeah. Things to notice, and you go to the look at Mother Teresa's place. Yeah, or the big buildings made by the British. Those kinds of attention.
Yeah, one other question. I would just like to ask you if you could just tell us a little bit how you come back to research, because it's, I guess it's an adventure for you. I'm working in archives, so all these, you know, texts are available, easily available in libraries or online. How do you proceed actually?
Well,
Find whatever you need to.
yeah, I mean, primary sources are very important. I almost I start with primary sources. When doing my doctoral research, I collected a host of collected quite a collection of texts that I want to look at from different perspectives, all centered on travel and translation. But the point is to kind of look at them as independent studies, but also connected to the central idea. And so the sources have so far been the texts themselves mostly, and some archival research. For example, the French library online, the Studio National. That meant I will not necessarily be traveling all the time. There is a lot of colonial-era documents of India, in South India, in the archives. I have been there once. For this research, for example, I need to travel in South India, and that's part of the planning, and also the archives. In general, I would say a simple answer is I'm very much dependent on the primary sources and translating as I go. So my translator read, I translate. So that's the first part I would say. Archival work, some. Yeah. I don't know if it's a multidisciplinary, but
Are there any other scholars working on this text in French? Or
yeah, there are several. I'm part of a study group in France. Exclusively, I don't think they're good. But they exclusively research travel, French travel accounts. So there's a lot of it there about routes, travel routes, and 16th and 20th century on land and water flow. And there has been French travel writing has not been looked at from the perspective of translators, as far as I know, but as the political history of the French in India has been looked at. So that's an interesting source, which kind of gives me the foundation to work on. There have been work on that from that perspective. There's also Kate Marsh's work, which I found extremely valuable. She works in English, looks at the French cultural production, Indo-French cultural connection and production, and it kind of overlaps with the period I'm looking at. And that has been quite, it is one of the first works of its kind on French writing. And there are a few very excellent databases. All things French about part of the University of Liverpool in that put together the database ongoing work. Which is ongoing, it's done, but it is a very good resource. So there's a lot now to work with.
I might add something else that would make it even more Sanjukta, because I think it just struck me while I was listening how much your understanding of text is so primarily determined by translation. And I wondered, especially with the material that you presented, I was so struck by these beautiful images of the buildings. And also of the maps, and those can also be approached as texts, right? That can be read and that really complicate, in a sense, of material culture. The way I can see you nodding. So that's I think that thinking that too might be ways of, you know, as you say, you wanted to make it much more composite, and certainly that material aspect, I think, or reading, you know, also thinking about which sources you have and how historical they are, and as you're talking about the changing landscapes and changing geographies and everything, that would definitely, like, thinking not excluding you know, the even images of the buildings, but if you can go there to think about them, including them as part of your resources for analysis as well, will be very valuable, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this is part of the plan to kind of travel not only for the archives, but to have a sense of the place, you know, and have visuals to accompany, or to at times, you know, kind of combine elements, resources to create, once again, kind of comparative and composite analysis.
So when you talk also about semiotics, right?
Yes, yeah, I haven't really planned all of it yet. It's I just, the first article on this topic is like it's going to be published in the works. It's going to be published in the Studies in Travel Writing. Yeah. And so that's another group, actually, when I was talking, we were talking about research groups, a group of researchers who looked at the travelee writing back. That's kind of the topic under which this work is going to be published. But I take slightly different, my take is slightly different, the way to establish how do you think of writing back. So I kind of partially identify with the travelee thing, but not, it's only partial identification because language, difference of place, but there's something to be said for some cultural knowledge and my research. Speaking on behalf of the travelee, that's not necessarily refine the travelee.
Yes, so we
Anyway,
so I hope that we maybe propose from a universal goal. And that's really interesting because I think that really, I think it's
and so I'm that would be really to conclude
Okay. Thank you so much. Sanjukta. Very interesting.